Okay, Frank, it's yours. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. So, as John mentioned, I'm Frank Krawczel, and I'm the Michigan developer for sPower. I'm based out of Richmond. I do spend quite a bit of time in Michigan, and our company sPower is headquartered out of Salt Lake City, Utah. And we've also made an effort to hire folks locally. So during the development stage, we have hired an environmental consultant that's out of Traverse City, and then a surveyor that's right outside of Detroit. So they've been great to give us local knowledge, and then the connection with Great Lakes Renewable Energy Alliance has also really given us the opportunity to reach out to some of you folks, specifically when we went to go permit Letts Creek and get some letters of support. So thank you to all of you who did support that. That was a big step. That was actually the first project that we got permitted in Michigan. So we're really excited now. For a little bit of backstory on these projects, we have been working on them since 2017, and we really started to pick up momentum over the last year. And we had open houses last December, and we had plans for open houses, but then COVID struck. Things went a little differently than we had planned, but all in all, I think that we've done an effective effort to still reach out to folks and make that connection. Like we had unanimous approval at Letts Creek, so I like to think that we're doing something right. And I think that this is just the part of sPower working in Michigan. We, as a company, we really do like the state. We like bringing renewables to the Great Lakes region, and we're actually opening up an office in Chicago. So the logistics behind opening up an office right now, has its own hurdles, but it's definitely part of our strategic plan at this point. So a few things I'm going to cover today, just a little bit more about sPower, some of the portfolio information. I actually have some visual simulations that we got together for our Letts Creek project, and then economic impacts. That's primarily based on Letts Creek. We have some preliminary information for the other two projects. And then, what we strive as a company, sPower, just in terms of community engagement. Our business model as a developer is different than a lot of other players that you see in our market. A lot of other players you'll see come into a market and get land rights, get an interconnection filing, get everything all set, ready to go, and then right before construction, flip the project to a utility or another developer that has stronger financials that can hold on to the project for its whole project life. So we are essentially that developer that self-develop. We self-build. Well, we build. We typically hire an EPC. We're kind of toying with the idea of doing a little bit more self-performance, and then afterwards, once the project's fully constructed, we own these projects for what we project to be 35 years. That's what 35 years is what we run through our model. But as everyone probably knows, with the technology, there's mention of them expecting these projects to last up to 40 years plus. So we're the owner and operator of these projects for the entire life. So a little bit more about sPower. Beyond what I just said, we're an independent power producer. So we are the owner and operator. The portfolio that we operate is over 155 projects in 12 states for a total of 1,600 megawatts. And then we also have a robust pipeline of roughly 15 gigawatts of projects under development. Again, these Michigan projects, they're the first for our president of Michigan, but I think just the start, really. And we also, we focused a bit of time into wind. Now we have some operating projects in wind. We're also getting into battery storage. We're actually starting to, we'll start construction on our first standalone battery storage project. I think it's 100 megawatts AC starting next year. So that's pretty exciting. You can see on this map where we have projects, that are operating in the States, and then the little dots showing the actual projects, and then where we're developing as well. So pretty much covering the entire United States. And to know sPower, it's really helpful to understand who our parents are. So we're privately owned by two globally recognized companies, AES and IMCO. AES is an international utility based out of Arlington, Virginia. Many of you may have heard of them. They do a lot of work down in Latin America and South America. And then the other owner, AIMCO, they're the Alberta Pension Fund. So they have a $119 billion investment portfolio. And what this really does, the combination of these two, is it gives us unique access to industry expertise. And so the industry expertise comes from AES and their knowledge and building these plants and operating these plants all over the world, and then AIMCO giving us strong financials. And this really just ensures that we have long-term growth for our company, and you can tough times and also thrive when the industry's thriving, which right now is certainly the case. So I'll provide a little bit of project overview. I do have just a quick, everyone here, it's my impression that everyone has some sense of how this technology works, how the energy is powered into the grid. But I really like this graphic to show just, it really simplifies things, makes it fairly straightforward. So, source that what we're talking about, these are the projects that we're building, and it's going to be connected into the grid. And, we'll have off-take either with a utility or a corporate off-taker, and that, the grid essentially delivers that energy to them. Now, as everyone probably knows, it's, we're injecting, essentially shotgunning, having buckshot into the grid. It's pretty hard to trace each electron, but nevertheless, reducing the demand for coal fire plants and other generating units that may be more impactful, or I guess more harmful for the environment. Now I'll get to our projects, the good stuff. So here's our portfolio as of now. Here are the three projects that we are currently developing. So these two are in the Jackson County area. You can see that one is, well, actually both are right on the county line. That wasn't intentional, it just ended up being that way. And then this one over here is PULLMAN, that's over in Allegan County. So in Jackson County, we have Letts Creek, Cement City. Letts Creek is Grass Lake Charter Township. Cement City is in Columbia Township. And then PULLMAN over in Allegan County is in Lee Township. Okay, so here's Letts Creek, just a simple point of reference with the roads and where it is. It's essentially right off Highway 94, close to the intersection of East Michigan, North Francisco Road. I'm not sure, well, I'm curious to hear during the questions section if any of the members are close to any of these sites, and I guess your impression on the area, and hopefully it's a good fit and will match the aesthetics of the area. I certainly think so, but I think I'm biased. Letts Creek is a 15 megawatt project, 15 megawatt AC project, so alternating current. The DC, we typically look for a 1.3 conversion from DC to AC. So the DC is actually 19.5 megawatts. All of these projects are going to be on single axis tracker. The specific racking system that we're using is called ATI. And then the timing for these projects, we plan to start construction next spring and be complete end of the year. For Letts Creek specifically, we do have that special land use permit acquired now, and we also have a final site plan acquired now too. And that was voted on last month, and we actually received unanimous approval from the Planning Commission. So that was very nice to see. And then for all these projects, the offtake will be sold, the power, the electricity will be sold directly to Consumers Energy. Cement City, the other project that is also in Jackson County. This one's in Columbia Township, really close to US 127. That's South Meridian Road. This is still south of 94. Really close to the intersection of Hyde Road and White Road. If any of these roads, if there's anyone local that has a sense for where these roads are, it's really close to Lenawi County. I hope I said that correctly. And again, you know, it's the same construction timeline. We have our engineering grind on this project right now to get a site plan together and finalize exactly what our array layout will look like. Plan to submit our land use permit application by September. So this one's I think one of the challenging projects. There's going to be a long lead time with the special land use permit. So we have to, for Letts Creek, for example, we had to only go through a planning commission. Cement City, we have to go through a planning commission and board of trustees, and have to have ultimate approval board of trustees. So whereas Letts Creek is, you know, a 2-month timeline permitting process, at a minimum, Cement City is a 3-month timeline. And if you do the final site plan separate, it turns into about a 6-month timeline. So we're working diligently to make sure that we're still able to achieve our notice to proceed in spring of next year. And I think we're on track. For this project, fortunately, we don't have to deal with any equal permitting because we will be avoiding all wetland impacts. So for Pullman, I don't have as pretty of a map as the other projects, primarily because these maps that were created for Cement City and Letts Creek were for our open house. We had an open house planned for Pullman, and then COVID struck, and that never happened. So we never got the display boards together and all that we would typically have. As I mentioned earlier, Pullman, it's the project that's on the western side of the state, Lee Township again, Allegan County. It's also a 20 megawatt project like Cement City. And again, same construction timeline, spring to be complete, the commercial operation date by the end of 2021, the electricity will be sold to consumers. This one's a little bit interesting in that we don't need a conditional use permit or a special land use permit, but we are going through equal permitting, primarily because you'll see that these parcels are separated, so we had to run a collection line route. And the collection line route goes through a wetland, so we have to do a individual permit to ultimately be granted the ability to construct an enforced wetland. Okay, and all in all, as John mentioned, this is a 55 megawatt project portfolio, sorry. It's expected to produce roughly 100,000 megawatt hours a year. What that means is it's equal to the energy of 8,000 homes annually. So what this is saying is not the electricity that a home uses, but really the overall energy that a home would use. You know, in theory, if you ran your home completely off of electricity, you know, if you didn't have propane or natural gas for heat, then that's what this power would be able to do, is power 8,000 homes. This is also equal to the greenhouse gas emissions of 15,000 cars driven in 1 year. And then it offsets 71,000 tons of CO2, which is equivalent to the carbon sequestration of 92,000 acres of forest in 1 year. That number always really gets me, and it's quite significant how much CO2 we're offsetting. So some general details, just to get an idea for what these things look like. You know, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the photovoltaics. You know, this is the technology that we're using. They're going to be mounted on, they'll be pole mounted on a racking system. ATI is the racking system, like I mentioned earlier. These piles that will be driven straight into the ground won't have any foundations, so no concrete slabs or anything. So you are still able to maintain the permeability of the surface while you're operating the project. So really the, you know, after construction and your operational, the stormwater impacts are, and the soil has been stabilized, stormwater impacts are minimal. The panels themselves sit roughly 5 to 8 feet in height. So you can kind of see this guy crouching over. What this height difference means is that, you know, these are trackers. So as the sun rises, they're going to be at a sharper angle following sunrise. And as it starts to head towards the middle of the day, they're going to be completely flat. So when they're completely flat, they'll be sitting at that 5 feet area. And then once it goes back into sunset, it'll be sitting at a sharper angle, and that top end of the panel will be roughly at 8 feet. So that's why we have a range there. All these projects, really, it's our standard to have a minimum setback of 50 feet. For Lake Creek, specifically, the township had a minimum requirement of 40 feet, but for our project, we had easements from telephone line companies that were 60 feet off the edge of the pavement. So we weren't able to build our array up to that 40-foot threshold anyways. So it really helped with our application, you know, to show that, you know, we're only abiding by the guidelines in the zoning ordinance, but, you know, going beyond that with a greater setback. As you can imagine, you know, we need to protect our equipment. Also need to protect people from getting into the site. Not to say that everything's electrified, but, you know, if someone doesn't know what they're doing, they, you know, could get into some trouble. So this fence typically looks, it's typically 8 feet in height. It ranges from 7 to 8. 7 is really like the minimum security requirement. And it could either be chain link. We a lot of times do a 7-foot chain link fence with 1 foot of barbed wire, depending on the requirements with the township with, you know, the special land use permit. Times they're not too keen on barbed wire, but you know, truth be told, that's, you know, we feel that that's one of the more secure ways of keeping our site safe. And quite honestly, it's also the cheap way to do it. These projects are also going to be connected to the grid through an overhead distribution line. So there will be poles on site for these projects specifically. Or Consumers Energy actually builds the GenTie, the line that connects our project to their substation or point of interconnection. Letts Creek is actually a line tap, meaning that there isn't a substation that we're pumping our power into, but more there will be a project substation, and then we'll tap straight into a distribution line.
What voltage is that tying?
46.
Thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of low impact development, these examples are specific to Letts Creek. Some of these examples do cross over to the other projects, but with the fact that we have just completed this presentation with the township, I had this information readily available. So for Letts Creek and Cement City, actually, both sites are agricultural. All three are rural, low density residential development. So that's actually for all three. For Cement City and Letts Creek, they're on the edge of the township and county. For Letts Creek, it had this road, North Francisco Road, and that's the only road that is adjacent to the site. So in terms of visibility, passerbys on the road, we really had to just focus on screening this main corridor. On the other end, Letts Creek had a railroad, which really started to encapsulate the project. So it really felt like this project was kind of removed from the township and from any view shed that the township may be concerned about. I mean, you can the back side of the site, it's a county line. This site specifically too didn't have any unique farmland soils, so that's actually a classification through the USDA, and they just, with what's present, it's not what they've classified as unique. In the future, there won't be impacts to wetlands, threatened endangered species, cultural resources, air quality. The air quality will actually improve, obviously, during operations. And then during construction, we use best management practices to reduce, heavier machinery and trucks coming through, specifically driving on dirt roads. What we do is we come in and have water tanks that spray down to reduce the amount of dust that's coming out. I'm looking at someone's question about, will it be possible to grow crops under the solar arrays or other multiple uses? How big is the typical fossil fuel or nuclear project compared to these solar ones or these silicon solar cells? A lot of questions there. Silicon solar cells, yes. Grow crops underneath. You can do pollinators. Multiple uses, yes. We have discussed with a landowner about doing sheep grazing on this site at Letts Creek. And how big is the typical fossil fuel or nuclear plant? A large coal-fired plant, you could get up to 800 megawatts, 500 megawatts or so. I think even up to 1 or 1.5 gigawatts. So these are significantly smaller, but your questions actually do kind of tie into a broader conversation in the industry that many of you are familiar with, in that our grid is very old and that it needs to be upgraded. So what solar does is that you have these different nodal areas that you inject energy into. So it requires us to upgrade our grid in many different areas versus what our grid has traditionally been designed as, having this major hub, a major power plant, and then it just sends energy, in a fan manner out to the customers. So by having a smaller 20 megawatt project kind of way off into the grid, it creates localized improvements that you otherwise wouldn't have with how we've traditionally built our grid. Okay, that was a tangent, but Letts Creek Township, they had a noise ordinance. So their requirement was to have the project stay below 45 decibels. So you can actually have the transformers built to spec. So you can, have that where it needs to be below 45 decibels when it's operating. So that's what we're able to do to make sure that there isn't a loud buzzing outside of the property line. Let's see, I think I need to pick up some speed here. So just real quick, this is an example of our landscaping plan that we proposed to the township. It's a mix of deciduous and evergreens, making an effort to have native species for the most sensitive areas of the project. So we had some residences that were right next door and then also across the street. So we created a 2-layered evergreen screen system to really block their view from the array. So these are just some details, some elevations on that landscaping plan. You can see how the deciduous design has shrubs between, whereas the evergreen design is just evergreens with a maximum spacing of 15 feet. Here's some visual simulations that we put together. So here's the parcel, here are the different vantage points that we'll be looking at here. And this is for Letts Creek. Here's one where the solar array is off into the distance. You can see the visual impacts are just minimal because it's so far away. Here's the next vantage point, kind of right where the residences are. Here's where you'll see this 2-layered evergreen screen. So here's what the conditions are, or what the system would look like without a screen. And then this is what the screen would look like after 5 years of growth. They will be installed 6 feet, and then this is assumed that they grow roughly a foot a year. And we had a landscape architect put these together for us. Here's down in the corner, we have a substation down here on the property boundary. So keep an eye out for that. Here you can see it now. We intended to get the substation pushed back as far as possible, just so, for visual impact purposes. And also this site surprisingly has quite a few hills right along the property line close to the road. So we had to push it back just to minimize grading. It's really our goal. We build these projects out of cost and also environmental to not have to grade so much. So we'll cut out areas where you have critical slopes, typically over 12, definitely 15 degrees, even 10-degree slopes really we'll avoid. And that substation is a result of us, making sure that we have a high and dry location for our substation, where we really don't need to grade too much to get the area, a flat area that we need for our transformer. And that's what the screen looks like. Here are the distribution lines coming in, crossing the street, then heading south, tap into the grid. Okay, so that's what the project looks like. The other projects will look fairly similar. Cement City, we actually have a natural screen, so there are existing 80-foot trees, mixture of primarily deciduous trees actually. So that's actually advantageous for us. It does raise a shading issue when it's south of our array, but so long as we're set back far enough, it really does, it maintains the current character of the area without really impacting it much. So you may have heard the economic impacts of these projects are significant. We typically are the largest taxpayer in the townships that we go and work and build an array in. So during the construction phase, we're looking at roughly 200 to 250 workers on site. We expect construction to be roughly 3 to 6 months of the real intensive construction activity, and then there will be a couple months where we test the site, make sure everything's working properly in order to deliver power into the grid. During the operations, these are quite easy to maintain. So 4 people really will be there to have routine maintenance. I think that the ultimate outcome, given that Letts Creek and Cement City are so close together, we'll probably have these workers operate and maintain both simultaneously. In terms, so this information, the construction phase and the operations phase, these construction workers, the way that we think it's going to happen is that we'll have the same group of construction workers. They'll go and build the first site. They'll probably do some civil work, and they'll have the contractor will have a civil team that can go to the next site, and they'll just leapfrog with the scopes of works to all the projects until they're all completed. So number 200 to 250 really means that we expect this for the whole portfolio, not for each individual project. And that's roughly the same case for the operations. Pullman, since it's 2 hours farther west from the other projects, we may have a separate group. These are some kinks that we're still working out. Okay, now finally, tax revenue. Again, largest taxpayers in the township. The project stayed in its current use. What the township would accrue would be roughly $287,000 over 35 years. And now with our new project that we're proposing, the township gets to accrue $5.3 million. So it's really significant. I gave a note to myself for the other projects. So right now we're estimating for Cement City that it'll be $6.5 million and Pullman will be $7.5 million. So all in all with this portfolio, we're talking about $19.3 million. So roughly $20 million of local tax revenue in Michigan. It's really impressive. Nope, skip a slide. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, the nice thing about these sites is that they do require minimal maintenance to keep them working properly. They're probably connected to a supervisory control and data acquisition system. So that's essentially a souped up Envoy. If any of you have any microinverter system, this is essentially a $250,000 to $500,000 Envoy that makes sure that our project is working properly. What it does essentially is gives us access to monitor the site remotely 24/7, 365 days a year. In Salt Lake City, we have a monitoring station, and that's actually a NERC requirement. So it's a requirement on the federal level for us to, once you operate a certain amount of megawatts, you have to have certain levels of protection, so you're not harming the grid, essentially, in short. And what the SCADA system does is it uses telemetry, again, to give visibility, including the panels, inverters, and transformers. So, with a microinverter, you can understand issues on the panel level. For our case, if on the string level, you can notice a string go out. And if they're in the rare event that there are problems, what it'll do is it'll send a signal, and we're able to dispatch crews immediately. So those 4 people that we have there, working locally, operating this project, they're essentially on call, available to be called on site to handle any issues. We even have the capability to shut down or curtail the plant remotely from our control room. And at the end of the day, what this is we have to follow Consumers Energy's guidelines to operate in their grid and give us the ability to sell power and do it safely as possible. And by having this SCADA system, it allows us to do that and prevent any issues, really. And now in terms of security, I mentioned the fence earlier. We'll have that perimeter fence, and then we'll also have an additional fence around our substation. So that creates 2 layers of protection, specifically around the higher voltage areas. Let's talk about community engagement. So I talked about this earlier. sPower really does strive to be a local community member since we are operating these projects throughout their entire life. We can't really hide away from the public if we do something wrong. So we try to engage them as much as possible. We work with local schools and communities. We do have sponsorships and partnerships, and have presentations to nonprofits like so. We do site tours, every now and again. That's a little challenge now with COVID. In some local partners that we've gotten together, that's specifically with GLREA, so you all. We've also interacted with and now have a member with Irish Hills Chamber of Commerce. They represent the Letts Creek and Cement City projects, and they really have been great for us to be able to reach out to businesses, you know, anywhere from gift baskets to finding a caterer to provide lunches for you know, first responders and fire departments and frontline school workers during COVID. And then lastly, we've also donated to local food pantries. So really trying to make an effort to be good here. And again, we're fully indebted to the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Alliance for you all providing letters of support when we went into Letts Creek. You know, it really is unique to get unanimous approval for a project. So that's something really special. And just a heads up, we will also be sending in an application for our Cement City project, and you may hear from us again in terms of if there are any local folks that around Columbia Township that would like to provide a letter of support. We would greatly appreciate it. So if you have any more questions, feel free to visit our website, and there's my personal contact information that you can reach out to me. That's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, can you stop the screen sharing, Frank? Oh, you know, we have some questions that have been accumulating in the chat box, and let's start with those if that's okay. Let's see. There was a question about growing crops under the solar arrays. I believe you answered that. And there's a question about, do you already have the offtake agreements with consumers, or is that just something that's kind of planned?
Yep. We have PPAs signed. So power purchase agreements are signed.
And do your project share similar module technology?
Yes. So we're using Jinko's solar modules, a variety of 400 watt and 450 watt modules.
And are you particularly excited about the bifacial modules greater than 500 watts?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I'm actually, in addition to this project, working on a project in Louisiana, and the soil is very sandy. So the albedo rating is very high because there's a lot of reflectivity on the lighter colored soils. So almost all of our projects beyond a commercial operation date of 2022, we're assuming bifacial modules for that build.
And why trackers? There's talk that really it's just cheaper to have more panels rather than use trackers. What's your strategy there?
Yeah, so as a developer, my main role is to run the budget and optimize the project to make it, produce the most amount of power and for us to be able to sell the most amount of power. So we ran a few sensitivities doing fixed tilt, and we actually tilted, we played with, if we can get a certain shoulder of maximum production at this time of day, how does that look in terms of revenues? And we played with the azimuth all the way from 90 all the way on a 5-degree interval all the way around to 9-degree facing west. So we ran about 20 different scenarios, and the result was none of them beat a tracker system, even with the additional cost.
Okay. And are you a private firm, sPower? Do you sell stock to the public?
AES has stock, but not sPower.
Okay. And there's a question about, you had mentioned trees to the south. Would there also be trees to the east and west?
Yes. Yeah, and actually, so we have to have setbacks with our array from tree lines, and we actually have to have greater setbacks on the east and west sides than the south with the tracker system.
And, you know, with, we do get a little snow here in Michigan. What's your take about that as it relates to the bifacial panels? Is that a consideration when you look at bifacial patterns that we get a decent amount of snow?
Yeah, and you know, it's a little bit tricky, right? Because the snow is going to cover our panels on the top side, but you know, the trackers should be able to shake off some of that snow, and if there's some still snow cover, that is incredibly advantageous. We're actually installing 2 albedometers on yeah, 2 of our sites, and we're putting those on in a month, and we're going to have them sitting on site for a year, so then we can understand the reflectivity of the ground on a full year rotation, and then we'll incorporate that in our production, which ultimately will dictate our revenue.
Oh, super. Well, I think
Yeah, John, I can add to that. Do you mind?
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a couple test sites in Wisconsin that have been in place for, I think, 11 months. And they're showing about 16% increase in output from bifacial.
That's what I like to hear. That's great.
And the snow did have quite an effect. And I think you're right about the advantage of using the tracker to get rid of snow. That's, you know, when you can move the panel, you can optimize whatever heat you can use. So, and the other thing, I should point out that I'm associated with Harvest Solar and
Okay.
you probably know the name. And, but I'm also part of the Soil Conservation District in the county next to Jackson, which is pronounced Lenawee.
Lenawee, thank you.
Okay. And we're quite, me personally, and our district to some extent is quite interested in co-benefits from having solar. One thing, if I was in your case, I would optimize is the fact that there's 2 drip lines when you have a tracker. You only have 1 drip line when you run a fixed array. And I'm doing maintenance on a 1 megawatt site in Lenawee County. And I'm starting to notice how the vegetation is changing. It was originally a uniform clover stand, particularly for pollinators. And, you know, now the deep-rooted plants are growing under the panels where they can take care of soil moisture, but don't get any rain. And so I'm working to try to figure out how to optimize that. So that is one thing I want to ask you about your trackers. Are you able to command, when your maintenance crew is there, are you able to command the tracker so that the 2 high sides will go together and therefore you have no low side to mow under? And then you can go and mow every other one. And then when you come back, you command the unit to go the other way, and then you can mow through the high side only. Is that a feature that you have in your system?
Yes, I have seen a photo of what you're describing. I can't speak too much more beyond, just because that's more of how our operation crew works on that. But yeah, the trackers do have some ability to move on a row by row. Actually, I take that back. Not on a row by row, but more, as you know, the trackers are kind of connected on a block, so they can. Let me get back to that question. Actually, I mean, I'm kind of thinking about it a little bit more. I'll have to follow up.
Okay.
Do we have, you know, unmute yourself if you want to ask the question, or go ahead.
Frank, this is John. You mentioned the possibility of sheep.
Yeah. So we had a conversation with, I think it was Richard Murphy over at Michigan State University. He has, I think, their sheep department, or something along those lines. And yeah, our landowner is very interested in that as well. So we're toying with the idea of, you know, what are the preliminary design considerations that we need to have to set this up for the future, to where, you know, we don't have to make this incredibly expensive retrofit later. So one of the things is that we're looking at an interior fence, you know, just for the sheep, and it would essentially separate the whole project site into 3 major sections. And our goal would be to have the sheep on site year round. At least that's how we've discussed. And yeah, we would just essentially rotate them throughout the year to the different plots that are sectioned off.
That's great. On a different note, I just want to say what a pleasure it has been to work with you and your company. And I just want to compliment you with your approach with working with the community and doing everything the right way. So often you hear about how developers can alienate local folks, but you all have the intelligence and the sensitivity to do it correctly. And I just want to pay you a great compliment for your approach.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we greatly appreciate that.
I'd like to say the same thing, because I was at your presentation in Columbia Township. You know, the guys there did a good job, what, a year ago? And so I say the same thing to you.
Thank you.
Hey, Frank, how many acres are you using in like a, you know, 15, 20 megawatt project? And also, when you look for different sites, you know, what are your major factors to kind of pick this location versus that location?
Yeah, so we, first question, the amount of acres. So the tree site is using 107 acres, gross acres. I want to say it's roughly 80 to 90 acres that will have an array and substation on it. For the 20 megawatt projects, one project is roughly 160. I want to say 130 or so will have an array on it, the substation. The rule of thumb that we typically look to when prospecting land is 7 acres a megawatt of just gross land. So that's for future reference for everyone. In terms of finding those specific sites, grid infrastructure is the most critical thing. We've, you know, even run into sites where, how do I put this shortly? So the interconnection process is long and extensive, as many are probably aware of. You know, as I mentioned, we started these projects in 2017. We executed the generating interconnection agreement in 2019. So it was a 2-year span of just having studies complete. In that time period, ideally you've selected a site where the substation or line tap can handle the amount of power that you're trying to put into the grid. If not, you're either going to be hit with major upgrade costs just because they need to essentially rebuild a substation to handle it. And that can completely kill a project in itself, just with, you know, having to pay millions of dollars in upgrade costs. So you get different phases in this interconnection study. You'll get, you know, a first study, and you typically have to post a payment, and then a second study. So you really have to commit to these things early, and you start putting down hundreds of thousands of dollars over the 2 years, hoping that, you know, ultimately you'll have a viable project that you can sell to offtake and that you can get permitted. So it's a risk that keeps the industry interesting. Sorry.
So I have a question about that. Is anyone in our country or anyone in the world put together a package where they say, here, 10 megawatts, 2 containers of batteries, it's a plug-in system. We can put this any place we have a rural substation. Is anybody developing a distributed system where they have that kind of already engineered system that can basically be plugged down almost anywhere?
I don't have a good answer for your question, honestly, just because that's not really what I focus on. I don't think so. But what you're describing is also very similar to the smaller projects that we've even seen in Michigan. There have been a lot of 2 megawatt projects in Michigan that are currently being built. And one thing, and this isn't 100% certain, but with how we've worked with consumers, there's essentially a threshold at 2 megawatts. And when you go over 2 megawatts, you enter in this world of, extensive interconnection studies and upgrades. So if you stay below that 2 megawatt system, it should be, a clean shot without being too much with significant interconnection costs. So to answer your question in a way, 2 megawatts in Congress territory, the lucky number for that.
I understand.
Hi, Frank. Along those lines, this is Joe Cup. Are you planning for storage at some point on these projects, like a storage or a repower as a long-term owner? Do you consider those in the beginning of a project?
Yeah, not in Michigan yet. That's definitely happening across the nation. There are developers that, have projects that they're now putting in solar at their current sites to accompany it, just so they can sell power, for longer periods of time in different times of the day. I think that's a likely scenario for our industry in general, especially as battery becomes cheaper to have these installations, and you can have them sized to whatever you may be able to trade in the market.
Sure. And the only other question I had was about Pullman. Is that one interconnection across that road, or do you have 2 interconnections?
It's one interconnection. Where you saw that the parcel split, we have to run our own collection line to meet to the parcels to the east. And then that's where we have our project substation, and consumers will come and meet us over there. So in a way, we almost have 2 arrays on the outside and 1 substation in the middle, and working collection lines.
Thanks.
Hey, Frank, did you, it sounds like things went very well with the community engagement. Did you find that there was some opposition in any of the 3 communities?
Letts Creek, no. There were folks that asked good questions, about recycling solar panels. But beyond that, no, it was unanimous approval, and from the public and the planning commissioners. It was incredible. With Columbia Township, I'm a little nervous because we are entering that permitting process soon, and we just don't have a sense for, COVID has really created a firewall between us and communities. I've been thinking about how we can have the outreach. I think we might have an open house through, and if you all are interested, through the Chamber of Commerce, try to engage local businesses. We have done we've probably done the most outreach in local donations in the township. But, we need, I guess until you have the public hearing, you're kind of nervous the whole time.
Well, a suggestion is that if you engage some of the local state legislators, they tend to have a network of emails of constituents, that if you put together some type of Zoom public hearing or town hall meeting, if you ask the legislators to send out the notice, that might help boost turnout. And I find that the legislature on a bipartisan basis is becoming more and more supportive of solar projects and wind projects. And And that one slide you showed where you show how the increase in property taxes for local schools and local communities and the jobs that are created, all that is just really good stuff that really helps to convince, you know, legislators as well as local folks to get on board.
Yeah.
And we'll be glad to help out in any way. So just keep us posted.
I appreciate that.
We got a few minutes before 8, and so I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Well, I'll say, Frank, that I have met twice with Julie Alexander, who's the representative from Jackson County to Lansing. And I think she's fairly well versed, and she's always given supportive comments. And she's a member of the Ag Committee.
The Ag Community?
The Ag Committee in the House in Lansing.
Okay.
Okay. Would you mind me calling you offline and have an additional conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
It'd be great.
Yeah. Any an additional question from anybody? Well, hey.
Hi, this is
Wait a minute. Go ahead, Phil.
yeah, sorry. This is Phil Rary. I live in Lenawee County as well. Unfortunately, I live across from a pump jack, which has been there for many years now, and now it's actually been idle for a year. So I tend to be a little bit NIMBY-ish about site pollution, and I know you've kind of already addressed that. But in one of your visualizations, you actually showed some overhead wires coming off your PV system. I don't know if those already existed or if you're actually introducing more overhead wires. But I've always been a big fan of bearing wires whenever possible. Is that something you guys consider?
It's so what's expensive is the transition from underground to overhead, and the grid that we're tapping into and the consumers, the line that they're building is overhead. So we're really just putting one pole in from our substation, and then they're meeting us. That the primary scope for building those lines is up to consumers. So not to kick the question to consumers, I'll tip you to that one. It is significantly more expensive. I think our engineers have told us 3 times more expensive to go underground.
Right, but you know, our country is awash in overhead lines, and you go into some cities and it's like it's the first thing you see. So, thanks.
Well, Frank, hey, thank you very much. This has been very interesting, and it's always good to kind of hear how things are going in the various parts of the state with solar developments. It's really reassuring to hear that there was so much community support. So again, thank you for making this presentation, and we look forward to kind of working with you in the future. With that, I wish everybody a good night, and stay safe and stay well. Take care.
Thank you.
Good job, John. Thank you for setting this up.